China-EU relations high on the agenda. For more on this, we are joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Liu Baocheng, who is the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics here in Beijing. Welcome, Professor. And also in Berlin, we have Mr. Joseph Yanin, who is a Senior Policy Fellow from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Mr. Yanin. Meanwhile, in Milan, Italy, we are joined by Mr. Riccardo Monti, who is the president of the Italian Institute for Foreign Trade. Welcome as well, Mr. Monti. This is certainly a very important day for China-EU relations. First of all, let's go to the specific ones. China, Mr. Yanin, has already been talking about joining the European Fund for Strategic Investment, which is as big as 315 billion euro. But the way of participating is still not clear at this moment. Can you help us to understand some of the ways that the two sides might be working together?
Well, the Juncker Plan only has, in part, funding from public sources. That's from the EU budget and member state budget contributions. The large part of that is seeking to kind of leverage these public funds with private investment. So China is a welcome partner to this. The conditions still have to be worked out, but it is an open invitation to businesses, but also to state funds, to many economic actors around the world to invest in Europe's infrastructure future.
Yes, indeed, that could be one way. The other way is for European countries, Professor Liu, to participate in AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, if we talk about bilateral investment possibilities. 25%, that's mainly what the players inside AIIB as founding members who are outside the Asian region that can contribute. How much do you think European countries can really contribute, particularly how much benefit can they really get from here?
Well, right now, 14 European countries have joined the AIIB, and the benefit is clear because Asia provides the driving force for economic growth for the whole world. So therefore, the infrastructure development is a key. And it's also very focused one for the infrastructure development. So therefore, both in terms of the direct investment for the infrastructure is rewarding, and also with the more developed infrastructure in China and in the rest of the Asia. So the total investment environment for many of the European companies can greatly improve.
Not only the European Fund for Strategic Investment, not only AIIB either, we also see China is willing to buy into more bonds coming from the European Development Bank. But on the other hand, Mr. Monti, you are a trade expert, I would say. The bilateral investment trade treaty has been delayed once and again when it comes to real conclusion. How do we look at that delay, and how do you think the European countries, the EU particularly, can work on that?
Well, in this negotiation, there's a lot of technical complexity. Most trade agreements I know have been delayed sometimes for years, so I don't see any particular element. In the long term, we have a great interest in having a smart, modern, advanced investment trade agreement with China. So I do not believe there's any structural reason not to go ahead with this. It will take some time, but I think most European countries are well aware of this important benefit that will come from a trade and investment agreement with China.
But Mr. Monti, efficiency is a very important issue, isn't it? I mean, particularly in the ever-changing world when European countries and China still have the need for one another at this moment.
Yes, of course, as a trade promotion agency and the president, we're always pro-trade. China in the last few years has, I believe, played a very important role in stabilizing the world trade flows. Of course, China today has a massive reserve in cash, and they are speeding up their investment outside. And Italy is actually, in the first few months of 2015, the country in Europe in which the biggest flow of investment came from China. So we are very much in favor of an active role of China, both as a trade partner, as an investor.
That might be the case for Italy, but what about for the other European countries? Mr. Yanning, because at this moment, the number I got here, China only is a very small investor inside Europe, 3%, accounting to the total of other countries' investment into Europe. So what we are talking about is efficiency, mutual needs, and when are we going to get there? How much does political will and decision-making process play a role from the European side?
Well, certainly more Chinese investment is welcome. And also it would be welcome if that investment over time spreads to the various segments of the large European market. I think, as my colleague from Italy pointed out, I think there is a mutual learning taking place on the investment negotiations because as China negotiates the terms of its longer-term investments in Europe, Europeans negotiate the same for their investments into China. And I think both sides through this process will understand better what it takes to set up an investment regime that is sustainable, that is mutually beneficial, and that actually also fulfills the needs and requirements of businesses in this process, because after all, that's what it's for. You know, it's not for the satisfaction of governments, but it's to create an environment in which business can flourish over the longer term.
Right.
And I think that's a very important process between the two sides.
It is an important learning process, Professor Liu. We understand Chinese Premier, this is already his third time inside Europe for this year alone, not to mention some of the previous trips he has already made. Certainly, he's been having a lot of plans in the hand and also in the mind. But still, the efficiency issue, because China has this Silk Road and Belt Initiative, and also China has this idea together with others, AIIB. Meanwhile, China also tried to propose its production capacity together with some of its manufacturing capabilities to combine with the European technology advantages. These are all great ideas. It's about implementation, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think now the relationship between China and Europe on a conceptual level is very positive, but when it comes to real implementation, it's one versus many voices. So like the recognition of the Chinese market status, market economy status, and when you talk to individual countries, they say, oh yes, why not? But when you talk to them collectively, there's different ideas. So the level of bureaucracy is really annoying, I think, to many of the negotiators that I know of in participating such a sort of negotiation. So now, with bilateral treaties with individual members, we are already there. But now we need a blanket, the bilateral investment treaty, and that really involves a lot of more bureaucracy.
I have to come back to you, Mr. Monti, because I'm sure as a trade person, you are fighting against bureaucracy all the time. Also discussion with them among various governments. How would that political process work? I mean, there is certainly needs from both sides, but time is not on neither's hand, particularly for European countries. Do you, as a trade person, propose some kinds of ways and means for the politicians to figure out some real plans? In this regard, how much political will do you really see in the European political leaders and also individual government leaders? Mr. Monti.
Well, of course, trade is proven to be a win-win situation. So when there's free trade, we generate wealth and employment on both sides of the trade. Of course, China has been in the past, in the first wave of globalization, a pretty tough competitor for most of the manufacturing sector in the European Union and in Italy especially. So there's voices that are sort of resisting. But if I look at the overall political spectrum, I'm seeing increasing consensus. What we're doing is we're usually fighting the technical battle in the custom administration to make the flow of the product easier and faster. And within the trade negotiation, we provide to our political leaders all the elements on which area we should put. For example, we are pushing in every international trade agreement for some sort of defense of the denomination of origin of our food product that are very often copied and imitated globally. But as I see the trend, I believe that today the tide is reversing and more countries are understanding the value and the positive effect of free trade. I think the new wave of bilateral agreement, starting from the Trans-Pacific and the TTIP, will happen in the next couple of years.
All right, Professor, Mr. Yanning, though, you know better than I do about the European politics, and probably than many others who are watching our show today. Can you help us to understand what are some of the specific difficulties? Previously, there was protectionism as Chinese would see it coming from Europe, but now, as Mr. Monti said, the tide is reversing. So how fast will the tide reverse to catch up with the needs of both sides? I have to throw that question back to you again, Mr. Yanning.
Yes, Tianwei, first of all, it's hard for Chinese to understand these conflicting messages. But at times it is rather easy from one of those capitals of 28 member states to tell your Chinese counterpart, oh yes, we would be willing, but there are some others. I think on trade, the music plays in Brussels. So there should be a very close focus from the Chinese side on what happens in Brussels, because that is actually where decisions are made, and that's where the member states get together. On the other hand, as in all politics, there's a lot of local content to it, and every single trade deal, every single major initiative has been accompanied by fears from regional or sectorial origin, of shifting production, of losing jobs, of not winning on this. So this is something that policymakers have to be very mindful of. They have to, and it even happened with the single market of the EU when it was created, that it created a lot of fears about losers. So this is something that does in fact need a bit of time. I think the mainstream of European policymakers now knows very well that it is these open trade regimes that we will need, but they have to sell it at home.
Another thing that we really need to pay attention to, if I don't ask that question, I'm not a good host at all, that is the Greece debt crisis. We understand Chinese and the European relations is pretty much being driven by economic gains from both sides. So what will the Greece problem mean for not only the EU, but also China, is the big question mark. Professor Liu, may I read to you a very brief quote coming from Chinese Premier Li Keqiang when he was being asked today about the Greece problem. He said, China is favoring a united Europe, prosperous European Union, and also a strong euro. And he's also saying that China has been making its own efforts to help Greece to overcome the debt crisis. But, Professor, the Premier is not specifying at all as to how much and to what extent, by what, China will help Greece directly this time. What do you think of the Greece problem mean for China and the EU relations?
I think, well, the Greece problem is much of the European problem. And yes, in terms of the economic, the interdependence, people say, well, now as the largest trading partner, when Europe sneezes, China will catch cold. But China is not there to swallow the pill, because that's the expansion fatigue, I should say, of the EU to include the Greece into the EU, the euro dollar zone, and now it is also up to EU as how to negotiate with Greece for the austerity program. So China can help, but help in a more mutually beneficial way, so we can get engaged more of the industry, for example, and also to buy some good assets, but not a direct philanthropy over there.
Of course, at this moment, Mr. Yanning, talk about the topic of so-called China saving EU and China saving Greece. Of course, those are very, in a way, unrealistic issues as people put it into the press. But what exactly do you think is going to be China's position, and how the EU is going to handle that vis-a-vis relations with China? Mr. Yanning.
Well, I see China having an interest in keeping the euro as one of the global reserve currencies. and China has acted to support that role in the past. China has also shown interest in diversifying its own financial reserves by investing into European state bonds. And that has always been my position, the Chinese have been rather cautious not to do this for political reasons mostly, but to have some sound economic reasoning behind it. And I think that is the case. And because of that economic reasoning, China would like to see the Eurozone succeed in managing the problems that smaller parts of it have. And it's not easy to see from the outside how complex it is in an incomplete political union to achieve the kind of changes that would allow for more solidarity to flow into Greece.
You're growing pain, definitely, with the EU. But before we go, Mr. Monti, the Greece is a big problem for the EU. People are also talking about Italy's economic problems and challenges. Where do you think your country is at this moment? What lessons can you draw from the current messy massages among European countries about the Greece problem, and what will Chinatown mean to you and many other European countries? Finally, from you.
Well, of course, Italian economy is recovering after a long recession. Our export has been very successful. Last year with the record ever trade surplus. This year we'll have an even better, although we have a strong deficit with China. I think Europe has seriously mismanaged a problem that is totally handleable. It's only 2% of European GDP, Greece. So, we've been waiting and working on a problem that quantitatively should have been solved years ago. Regarding the future, I think China is a very important trading partner for all over Europe. I think the big flow of Chinese investment would be a stabilizer. As I said, we have a big trade deficit with China. It's the only country with which we have a trade deficit, bar the one where we import gas and oil. I'm trying with my organization to rebalance this trade influx. But I think the rebalance will come more from the inflow of investment. You say only 3%, that's true. But 5 years ago, investment from China to Italy was zero. Last year were 4 billion. And the first 4 months of this year, we're already more than 4 billion. So if you look at in the timeline, actually the growth of Chinese investment is very impressive and will also generate a more balanced trade between the two parts.
Thank you very much. Let's take a look at the glass. Is it half empty or half full? It depends on your perspective. We certainly want to make sure that is going to grow when it comes to the water in the glass. Thank you, the three gentlemen, for being with us for a very important day for China and the EU. Joseph Yanning with us in Berlin, Riccardo Monti in Milan, and also Professor Liu Baocheng with us here in Beijing. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your contribution and input. Thank you.